Firstly, acknowledge the prior ownership of the land on which we gather. We thank the Aboriginal people for the use of the land today and pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. Can I quickly just go to a couple of points that Dave and Eugenie made just in regard to their own presentations. Volunteers, the issue around CULT communities, culturally and linguistically diverse communities, fantastic level of volunteering, absolutely abysmal level of them being represented at the leadership level. Don't know why, we need to address that. Some way we can make being on the leadership of those organizations attractive to people from the culturally and linguistically diverse community. That would be a great start. In fact, the Office of Multicultural Interest has started to run some programs around that. In terms of housing, one of the groups that I would be talking to in terms of what you've got there in Mandurah in particular would be the migrant resource centres, to look at whether or not they would be interested in being an investor so that we can have affordable housing provided to people who potentially could be here on humanitarian refugee visas, etc., or on permanent residency visas after having been through that process, but don't have the capacity to go into that. But migrant resource centres have built over time a considerable amount of funds, and they're able to do so. Now, I was going to go back and cover some of the issues around cultural diversity in this state, but I think given the shortage of time, what I'll do is just simply touch on a couple of aspects of it, and then talk to you about what it is that I think we need to do as a state and as a nation to accommodate the people, the increasing cultural diversity that we're seeing, and the nature of the diversity itself. I'll just make a couple of points in that respect. The top 10 birthplaces in WA are England, New Zealand, India, South Africa, the Philippines, Malaysia, China, Scotland, Italy and Ireland, and I don't expect you to remember any of that. But England and New Zealand remain the top 2 birthplaces for the overseas born in Western Australia. However, India has now replaced South Africa in 3rd place. I'm a firm believer that you can never have too many Indians. But the Philippines have replaced Scotland in 5th place, and Scotland's no longer in the top 10. China has replaced Italy in 7th place, and the highest growth rate has been amongst the Philippines-born people during the last 5 years, between 2011 and 2016. Increase in the number and proportion of people who speak another language. That's grown from 14% in 2011 to about almost 18% in 2016. So there's a massive increase there. Interestingly, we keep very, very abysmal levels of statistics in this country because we don't really know exactly what the diversity is about. If you looked at me, most of y'all would say, well, there's a person of Indian origin. However, I don't fit into any of the stats that we look at because I was not born in India. I fall into the born in Singapore category. And my total life in Singapore was 3 months before I got the hell out of there and went to Brunei. So do I qualify as an Indian? Not according to the stats. The only way you're going to pick up someone like myself in any of the stats is to overlay your place of birth with the languages spoken at home. And now you then start to get, I speak a language called Malayalam. Malayalam is from the south of India, from the state of Kerala. My mom speaks that, my mom's here, we speak to her in that language, and that's the only way you're going to pick up that I need, if I needed language skills, that would be the only way you would be able to pick it up, is to overlay your place of birth as in Singapore, but I speak an Indian language. So now you know that I could possibly be of Indian ancestry. Otherwise, I'm going to fall into that category of Singaporean born. Likewise, we have a number of refugees who've come here via detention centres and refugee camps in places like Egypt and now in Manus and Nauru. So are they born in Egypt? Yes, they are shown as being Egyptian born, but they happen to be Somali or Sudanese. And that's not picked up in any of our stats, and that's something that we've been wanting to get some better information about. The religions, and look, whatever I say in respect of multiculturalism and the cultural diversity, I will not argue for any issues of multiculturalism and cultural diversity management if it's going to further marginalise the indigenous people of this country, because that is simply, I will not argue for any issue of multiculturalism if there's a further marginalisation of Aboriginal people. So that's a starting point, and that you have to work from that basis at all times. Now, some of the things that we're looking at in terms of trying to achieve some form of equity and look, the whole concept of, we've gone away from the concept of talking about equality, and you know, Jeff Gallop and I had various arguments when he was the Premier and Minister for Multicultural Interests, and we were developing a multicultural charter in this state. One of the things that I kept saying to him, and it almost got to blows, I would say, look, I do not want to be an equal participant in an unequitable outcome. I do not want equality of opportunity. I want equity in the outcome. I don't care about the equal opportunity to achieve an inequitable outcome. So let's not even start discussing that. You want to talk about substantive equality? Yes, I'm happy to talk about that. But we do not talk about equality of opportunity. We do not talk about tolerance. Do you remember the term tolerance that used to be used about it? You know what tolerance is? I tolerate this person. There's immediately a superiority and inferiority position here. I will put up with that person. I've managed to beat Zed Sezelja, the Minister for Multicultural Affairs, into understanding that that's not what we accept in this country. So we do not talk about tolerance of other cultures. We talk in terms of the celebration, the practice of other cultures, as simple as that. Now, anything we do in terms of the representation, we believe our starting point has to be with the political parties to ensure that we have sufficient representation in the parliamentary process. Why is it that it was only in 2016 that we had the first Muslim woman in federal parliament? We've had Muslims coming here since the Cameliers came here. You know, we're talking about the Ghan, all of those people were Muslim. Yet it wasn't until 2016 that we had the first Muslim woman in federal parliament, Ban Ali. And why? What are the barriers that have existed to that point? So we've talked to the federal, the various parliamentary processes to say that we would like to see, you know, even, and you know, there are various systems that exist in places like India where they've got quotas for the different groups, etc. Whether a quota system will exist at the parliamentary level, we're not sure. Public sector organisations, we believe, should also be reflective of the population. You know, if the population of Western Australia is 1.9% or 2.3%, depending on which suburb you're in, Aboriginal, then we should have an equal representation for public sector organisations. We can't impose that on the private sector organisations, but certainly we should be leading by example of the public sector organisations. We should have a similar sort of 35% born overseas, which is the current level of people born overseas. Boards, you know, the boards at all levels don't reflect the community that they're actually representing, and that's not just true of not-for-profit organisations, but some of the corporate sector boards as well. That's something that needs to be done. One of the things that we believe that needs to be implemented as a fairly urgent matter is transcultural mental health services. There's been a great focus in recent years on mental health services being provided, but there is no funded transcultural mental health service in Western Australia. There is a referral service that comes out of the Fremantle multicultural sector, but there is no provision of funded transcultural mental health, and that's a concern. And you take that to another extreme. I gave evidence at the Senate Standing Committee on the prevention of suicides in Australia, and one of the things we pointed to was the fact that and this comes back to this issue around statistics, there are no statistics that indicate the ethnicity of people who've committed suicide. So I can't tell you whether there were X number of Indian people who committed suicide last year or X number of Chinese people that committed suicide last year. It is just bizarre. And that's the extension of not having mental health service that's providing for the transcultural issues. So you're going to end up in a suicide position. I've transported the bodies of 10 Indian students back to India to their homes because they've not settled into this country and they've committed suicide. And that's 10 bodies over the last 5 years. I don't want to do that anymore. I'm tired of doing it. I do not want to get involved in that space. So when we talk about transcultural mental health issues, the other thing we talk about there is also looking after students who come here. And it's appropriate we're doing this at a university. It is quite incredible. At one stage, going back about 3 years ago, I had 26 Indian students on suicide alert around Perth because they were about to commit suicide. And none of their pastoral care was attended to. We're happy to take the $20,000 or $30,000 that they pay in fees, but we're not prepared to give them any pastoral care. And that is a major problem as well. So there are lots of these other issues that we need, we've argued long and hard with the unions that the unions also need to take some responsibility for ensuring that 457 workers, etc., are also looked after in the workplace. That is a major problem, but it is a difficulty, but because the unions see themselves as being here to look after Australian workers. So we don't have any proper representation of people who are here on work visas. Language policies are problematic in the country. We have all sorts of different policies that apply department by department, and there is no overarching federal language services policy. When we were developing some for the health department, for example, the health department employees were surprised that they could not use and let me take Aisha as an example. Assuming that Aisha was not able to speak English, she brought along her 12-year-old daughter, and the health officials did not see it as an issue to discuss her sexual health with the 12-year-old daughter, or the father's sexual health with the 12-year-old daughter. They assumed that because there was someone there who could speak English and the language, it was okay to use them. And it wasn't until we came along and said, look, hey, that's completely inappropriate. Let's have an overarching policy. That's not the case. Now, we've been arguing for years that we should have the modern awards, the award systems should be in different languages as well, so that it's people who, we're bringing in workforces from China, from India, and various other places, but we do not provide an award in those languages. Safety information at the workplace should be around, it should be either graphic or should be in different languages. Good example, it was only a couple of years ago that there was a Sri Lankan chap who, in Belmont, he took a chainsaw to a 44-gallon drum, and when his remains were picked off the wall because he got blown across the room and smashed into a wall. And they said, well, there's enough safety information around that tells you can't do that in English. Here's someone who doesn't speak the language, is unable to read any of that. Why don't you have it in graphic science there? So all of that's just around the workplace, and this is the environment that we see. We're seeing the level of diversity that is unprecedented in this country, and it's something that we need to cater for, and the economy needs to start looking in terms of addressing that diversity. Now, can I just touch on one other issue that is also a major one from my perspective? You might not be aware, but there's been a lot of talk in recent times when Fraser Anning made that made that speech in Parliament, his maiden speech, which was a total and utter load of crap. Actually made all these accusations about the Muslim community, etc. One of the things that Turnbull and Shorten did was to talk in terms of, they issued motions that said, we will always preserve the non-discriminatory nature of our immigration policy. It is true to a point. We do not provide permanent residency visas and residency in this country if there's any member of your family who has a disability, who has a health condition or disability that is going to be, in the words of the department, a burden to the taxpayer exceeding $14,000. That is not $40,000 per year. That is $40,000 over the life of the person with a disability. So if I was coming here, for example, today, and anyone in my family had one of the health conditions or disability that was going to cost the taxpayer more than $40,000, and you imagine they take school fees into account over the life of the person. They take every possible service into account in the life of that person. It will exceed $40,000 in a matter of seconds. So we do not allow people with any kind of disability or any kind of health condition that is going to cost the taxpayer, we do not allow them permission to come into this country and remain here. I've dealt with 28 cases over the last 5 years. I've managed to get the minister to agree to 24 of them. Now, it took each one about a year to deal with, but the only way you can get it is for the minister to override the decision of the department. The department has no choice. They would not permit someone who has a disability to come into this country. So we do have a discriminatory migration policy. We then take that discrimination a step further and say that no one who is not a permanent resident of this country can access disability services like the NDIS. The NDIS is only available to people who are permanent residents. Therefore, all 457 visa holders are temporary residents. They cannot access disability services. All students are temporary residents and cannot access disability services. And how do we deal with that? That is the whole issue itself. Manusinaru, disability, people with disability, we know that there are 269 people with disability across the different detention centres in Australia and offshore. And of those, 29 of them are children. But we don't have any disability services available to any of them. So we need to address all of that. We need to address the cultural diversity before we can get to a position where we'll have, and that's the reality we face in this economy. And that's something that we need to deal with. Thank you.